He was a decorated Navy SEAL, buried with full military honors in the frozen snows of Alaska. But when his loyal German shepherd began barking at the coffin, everything changed. The flames of the cremation revealed a horrifying truth. The body inside wasn't his. Somewhere beneath the ice, the soldier they buried was still alive. And the secret he carried could expose a powerful general and shake the nation's faith. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The storm had quieted, leaving the town of Fairbanks, Alaska, blanketed in a cruel glacial silence. Wind whispered through the frozen pine trees, carrying the faint toll of a church bell as the military funeral began. Rows of uniforms stood motionless before a flag-draped coffin, and at its side sat Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat, intelligent amber eyes, and scars hidden beneath his fur from years of service. He had been trained for obedience, precision, and silence, yet today he could not stop trembling or growling, his instincts screaming that something inside that coffin was terribly wrong. Linda Cole stood a few feet away, her hands clenched together to keep them from shaking. At 54, she carried the grace of a woman who had learned to survive sorrow. Tall and slender, with graying hair tied in a neat bun beneath her black coat, her face was lined with exhaustion, but still held the sharp, calculating focus of her past. She had once been an intelligence analyst for the Navy. 20 years ago, she lost her husband in an explosion overseas. Now, the folded flag in her hands felt like history repeating itself. Daniel Brooks, her neighbor and lifelong friend, stood beside her. He was in his early 60s, with a square jaw covered in silver stubble and eyes that never stopped scanning. A retired detective turned private investigator, Daniel had seen too many funerals, too many lies written in official reports. His hands were rough from years of holding both handcuffs and whiskey glasses. He had promised Ethan, Linda's son, to look after her while he served as a Navy SEAL. Watching the woman beside him crumble again under military ritual made his chest ache with quiet rage. The chaplain's voice echoed in the cold air, solemn and detached. Soldiers lifted the coffin toward the waiting van that would carry it to the crematory. Rex whined, pulling at the leash until it cut into Daniel's wrist. "Easy, boy," he muttered, but Rex's ears flattened, his growl turning to a bark that broke through the stillness. It wasn't grief, it was warning. Linda's gaze shifted toward the handlers loading the coffin. One of them, a young corporal, avoided her eyes. His hands trembled as he latched the locks. Something inside her, the old analyst's instinct, stirred. The corporal's uniform bore the insignia of a logistics unit, not mortuary affairs. Why would a logistics officer handle the body of a decorated SEAL? After the ceremony, she approached him, her voice low but firm. "You were assigned to my son's detail?" The man froze, then nodded too quickly. "Ma'am, orders came from higher up," he stammered before retreating into the van. The engine roared, tires crunching over ice as it pulled away toward the military crematorium on the outskirts of town. Rex let out another bark, sharp and desperate, tugging Linda forward as if to chase after it. Daniel caught her arm. "Linda, it's over. He's gone." His tone was meant to soothe, but there was hesitation in his eyes. He had seen strange cases before, wrong tags, switched bodies, but something about this felt orchestrated. That night, snow fell again, thick and endless, covering the world in silence. Linda sat by the window of her small house on Birchwood Road, the folded flag resting on her lap. Rex lay at her feet, restless, his ears twitching every few seconds. On the wall above the fireplace hung photographs. A younger Linda in uniform beside her husband Thomas, both smiling in a desert base. Ethan as a boy, holding a wooden model of a submarine. Ethan as a man, in SEAL fatigues, standing with Rex at his side, the Alaskan mountains behind them. Her chest tightened. She remembered the last call she received from him 2 nights before his death. His voice was low, urgent. "Mom, if anything happens, trust Rex. He knows more than you think." The line had gone dead before she could ask what he meant. Rex suddenly rose and padded toward Ethan's old room. Linda followed, her heartbeat quickening. The dog nosed at the door, whining, then scratched at the floorboards. She turned on the light. Everything was as her son had left it. Neatly made bed, duffel bag on the chair, medals arranged in perfect alignment on the shelf. Yet Rex fixated on the small metal box beneath the bed, one she hadn't noticed before. He scratched and barked, refusing to move until she pulled it out. It was locked. The initials EC were engraved on the lid, along with a faint emblem of a trident, the SEAL insignia. Linda's fingers trembled as she brushed off the dust. Her instincts screamed evidence. She looked to Rex, whose tail wagged once before he sat upright, as if awaiting orders. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. The dog tilted his head, eyes bright and unblinking. Daniel arrived moments later after a panicked call from Linda. The snow clung to his coat, and his breath came out in heavy clouds. "You said Rex found something?" She showed him the box. He examined it with his flashlight. "This isn't standard issue," he muttered. "I've seen SEALs use these for encrypted drives." Before they could decide what to do, a car pulled up outside, a dark military SUV. 2 men in plain coats stepped out, faces hidden by scarves. Rex growled, standing between them and the door. Linda's heart hammered. Daniel peeked through the curtain. "Those aren't condolence visitors." The men scanned the yard with flashlights, checking tracks in the snow, moving with trained precision. Linda clutched the box to her chest. "Daniel, they know." He nodded grimly. "Then we leave. Now." He grabbed his coat and opened the back door quietly. Rex stayed close, moving with silent discipline. As they slipped into the blizzard, the wind howled louder, swallowing the sound of boots crunching after them. From the hill above, Linda looked back once at the house. The 2 men entered, one holding a small black device that blinked red. A moment later, the windows glowed with firelight, too bright, too sudden. The explosion tore through the snowstorm, shattering the silence of the night. Rex barked furiously, pulling at the leash, but Linda held him tight. Her tears froze against her cheeks as realization struck. Her son's death wasn't just suspicious, it was part of something monstrous. She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling but steady beneath the wind. "If Ethan is alive, I'll find him. And if he's dead, I'll find whoever made it happen." The detective nodded, eyes reflecting the burning ruin below. "Then we start with that box." Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, in a military crematorium by the frozen coast, the wrong Coffin was turning to ash. The real Ethan Cole, hidden beneath a different name, under the protection of those still loyal to him, was preparing to uncover the betrayal that had begun long before his death. The dawn that followed was pale and bruised, as though the sky itself bore witness to what had burned the night before. Linda Cole stood by the frozen riverbank, wrapped in Daniel's thick military jacket, watching the smoke still rising from what used to be her home. The air reeked faintly of gasoline and scorched pine. Her eyes were red and hollow, but her mind, trained by years in intelligence work, was awake again. Rex sat beside her, steam rising from his breath in the cold, his body tense, alert to every crackle of ice. Daniel Brooks was already pacing nearby, his gloved hands deep in his pockets. He hadn't slept, and his grizzled face carried that haunted stillness of a man who'd once believed he'd seen everything. "We can't stay here," he muttered, glancing toward the ridge. "They'll come back to finish the job." Linda didn't respond. Her gaze lingered on a charred photograph that had blown across the snow. A younger Ethan, grinning in uniform, his arm draped around Rex. The dog whined softly, nudging her knee. "We won't let them erase him," she whispered. Daniel had contacts in Anchorage, people who still owed him favors from his detective days. One of them, Mara Jensen, was a forensics analyst now freelancing for private cases. Mara was in her late 40s, with cropped black hair and pale Scandinavian skin that flushed pink against the cold. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. A single mother raising a teenage son, she had built her life around precision and control. Her workshop smelled of coffee and soldered wires, every surface covered with half-repaired devices. She agreed to meet them in an abandoned cabin outside Talk, where she could work discreetly. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at the cabin, a structure sagging beneath the weight of snow, its windows covered in frost. Inside, the fire Daniel started cracked weakly, barely warming the air. Mara greeted them with a nod, her breath forming little ghosts in the air. "You said you found something," she said. Linda handed her the small metal box Rex had discovered. "It belonged to my son. He was a Navy SEAL." Mara arched a brow. "And now he's dead, supposedly?" "He's alive," Linda replied without hesitation. Mara's fingers moved deftly over the box. Steel casing, double lock mechanism, military-grade encryption. She paused, eyes narrowing. "These are used to store field intelligence, coordinates, mission logs, sometimes names." She set it down carefully. "You're sure you want me to open this?" Daniel exchanged a look with Linda. "We've already lost everything. Whatever's inside is worth the risk." Rex paced the room as Mara worked, his claws clicking softly against the wood. Occasionally, he'd glance toward the window and growl, as if expecting company. His nose twitched at every gust of wind, every creak in the structure. Linda sat close to him, resting her hand on his fur. Her mind kept circling, back to the same thought. Ethan planned this. He left clues for me to find. When the box finally clicked open, the sound was almost deafening in the silence. Inside lay a small data drive and a folded slip of paper. Linda unfolded it carefully, her breath catching when she recognized Ethan's handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, trust no one wearing stars." Daniel frowned. "Stars?" "High-ranking officers," Linda said grimly. "It's military slang. He's talking about someone inside the Pentagon." Mara plugged the drive into her secure tablet, lines of code flickering across the screen. After several minutes, an image appeared. A map of Alaska, marked with shipping routes along the Yukon River, each labeled with military cargo codes. But the cargo wasn't weapons. It was methamphetamine and morphine derivatives, routed through Army supply lines to avoid customs. "Jesus," Daniel muttered. "He was investigating drug trafficking under military cover." Mara's eyes darted across the data. Look here, this symbol repeats in every document. She enlarged a digital insignia resembling a falcon clutching a dagger. Linda's heart froze. That's General Robert Kane's personal seal. General Kane had once been her husband's commanding officer, a man she had met once years ago at an award ceremony. She still remembered his face, tall, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair cropped close, the kind of man whose handshake felt like a command. His public persona was one of discipline and integrity, but she remembered the cold gleam in his gray eyes when he'd said, "In war, morality is a luxury, Mrs. Cole." Now, the same man's emblem was tied to her son's disappearance. Mara copied the files onto a portable drive. "This evidence is enough to get you both killed if it gets out. Do you have anywhere safe to go?" Daniel exhaled a white cloud of air. "There's an old ranger outpost west of Delta Junction. I still have the key." "Good," Mara said. "And if you need me again, you know how to find me." Her tone softened slightly as she looked at Linda. "You remind me of my sister. She used to fight for lost causes, too." As they prepared to leave, Rex began to bark suddenly, sharp and low. His fur bristled along his spine. Through the frost-covered window, Daniel spotted headlights cutting through the trees. "They found us!" he hissed. Mara snapped the laptop shut and shoved it into Linda's bag. "Go through the back. There's a snowmobile behind the shed." The roar of engines grew louder. Shadows moved beyond the tree line. 3 men, armed, wearing black tactical gear with no insignia. Daniel fired once through the window, the shot cracking like thunder. Linda grabbed Rex's collar and ran, snow whipping against her face. They stumbled through the drift toward the shed as bullets shattered the cabin windows. Mara yelled something from inside before an explosion rocked the forest. One of the intruders had thrown a grenade. The blast lit the trees with a fiery bloom. Linda fell into the snow, ears ringing. Daniel dragged her up, shouting, "Move!" Rex led the way to the snowmobile, barking furiously. Daniel started the engine, the noise deafening, and they tore off into the blizzard, the light from the burning cabin fading behind them. Wind clawed at their faces, visibility dropping to nothing. "What about Mara?" Linda cried over the roar. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll come back for her." But deep down, they both knew the odds. Hours later, they reached the ranger outpost, an abandoned building half buried under snow. Inside they found old cots, a rusted stove, and the smell of pine. Linda sank to the floor, clutching Rex. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from fear and realization. "He's fighting people in his own chain of command," she whispered. "A general running drugs through army convoys. No wonder they wanted him gone." Daniel removed his gloves, his fingers raw and bleeding. "And now they want to erase you, too." Rex nudged her hand gently, his tail barely wagging, eyes glinting in the firelight. "He's still alive," Linda murmured, staring into the flames. "If he weren't, they wouldn't be so desperate to destroy the evidence." Daniel leaned back, exhaustion etching deeper lines into his face. "Then we find him. But first, we find where he went next." As the fire crackled, Rex lifted his head suddenly and growled toward the door. Outside, faint lights flickered through the snowfall, 3 pinpoints of red moving closer. Daniel reached for his pistol. "They tracked us again," he whispered. But when the first silhouette emerged from the snow, Linda froze, her pulse hammering. The figure limped heavily, dragging a wounded leg, his face half hidden under frost and a torn hood. Then she saw the glint of a seal insignia around his neck. Her voice broke the silence. "Ethan?" The man lifted his head, eyes hollow but burning with life. "Mom!" he rasped, collapsing into the snow. The storm outside raged like a living thing, throwing fists of snow against the windows of the abandoned ranger outpost. Inside, the flickering fire cast uneven light on the faces gathered around it. Ethan Cole, pale and bruised, sat against the wall, wrapped in a wool blanket. His once strong frame had grown gaunt from weeks on the run, his jaw covered in rough stubble, and a thin scar traced his cheek, a reminder of how close death had come. His eyes, however, still held the same steely focus that had made him one of the SEAL's best. Rex lay close to him, head resting across Ethan's boots, never taking his eyes off the door, as if guarding his handler from ghosts. Linda knelt beside her son, hands trembling as she checked his bandaged shoulder. "You're burning up," she whispered. Ethan gave a faint smile. "It's nothing, Mom. Just a scratch." But Daniel Brooks knew better. He'd seen that kind of wound before. Shrapnel tearing through muscle. Daniel, with his weathered face and quiet authority, was now both protector and strategist. "We need supplies and medical gear," he said, rubbing a hand through his frost-streaked hair. "If they tracked us here, they'll keep coming." Ethan looked at his mother, guilt shadowing his expression. "I never meant for you to get pulled into this. When they staged my death, I thought you'd be safe." Linda's gaze hardened. "You underestimated me, son. Again." As dawn broke weakly over the frozen horizon, Daniel left briefly to scout the perimeter and returned with a stranger slung over his shoulder. The man groaned in pain as Daniel laid him down near the fire. "Found him half buried by the tree line," Daniel explained. The newcomer's face was weathered, with a graying beard and deep-set green eyes. His uniform was torn, but the insignia was unmistakable. Military intelligence. When he finally opened his eyes, he reached instinctively for his sidearm, but Ethan's voice stopped him cold. "Easy, Sergeant. You're among friends. For now." The man's name was Raymond Adler, a 4-to-5-year-old intelligence officer who had served under General Kane years earlier. Once sharp and ambitious, he now looked hollow, haunted by betrayal. His voice was low and steady, shaped by decades of classified silence. "You're Ethan Cole," he said, studying the young SEAL. "They said you were dead." "Not yet," Ethan replied. "You worked for Kane?" Adler's expression tightened. "I used to, until I found out what he was really moving through those convoys." Over a weak cup of instant coffee, Adler told his story. 2 months ago, he'd discovered encrypted manifests linking Kane's military transports to cartel shipments. Drugs, cash, and weapons laundered under Reconstruction aid. When he tried to expose it, his team was ambushed near Anchorage. He'd been running ever since. "You were investigating the same thing," he said to Ethan. "That makes us both targets." Linda listened, her analytical mind already connecting patterns. "If Kane's moving narcotics under federal protection, he's not working alone. He must have someone in the Department of Defense covering his tracks." Adler nodded. "And someone higher. The shipments pass clearance faster than paperwork can catch them." Ethan pulled something from around his neck, a steel locket, dull with age, but engraved with the SEAL insignia. "This belonged to Dad," he said quietly. "Before they killed him, he told me it contained the key. I thought he meant it symbolically." He pressed a small latch on the edge of the locket, revealing a hidden microchip no larger than a grain of rice. Daniel whistled softly. Guess that's not jewelry. Linda leaned forward. What's on it? Encrypted mission archives, Ethan said. Coordinates, names, call signs, people who were supposed to be dead but weren't. My father was on Kane long before I was. He left this with me before his last mission. Adler's eyes narrowed. You're saying your father's evidence survived 20 years? Ethan nodded grimly. He knew this would happen again. History repeating itself. While Ethan and Daniel worked to patch up Adler's wounds, Linda examined the chip using an old field tablet salvaged from Daniel's truck. The screen flickered, then filled with code. This isn't standard encryption, she murmured. It's double-layered with military-grade ciphers. Whoever built this wanted it buried forever. She paused, scrolling through fragmented files. Among the gibberish, a phrase repeated in several logs, Operation Northfall. Ethan frowned. I've seen that name before. It was referenced in one of Kane's hidden orders. Supposedly, it was a canceled mission in the Arctic Circle. Adler shook his head. Northfall isn't canceled. It's the next phase. Kane's using the same transport network to move his product south once the snow routes reopen. Daniel threw another log into the fire. So what's the move? We sit here and wait to die? Ethan's jaw tightened. No, we intercept one of those convoys. If we can get a sample of the shipment or a manifest, we can prove everything. Linda placed a hand on his arm. That's suicide. Ethan looked up, eyes burning with conviction. So is doing nothing. Rex rose from his place by the door, ears pricking, tail rigid. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Someone's out there, Daniel whispered, reaching for his rifle. The group froze, listening to the faint crunch of boots on snow. Then a knock. 3 slow taps echoed through the cabin. Ethan signaled Daniel to cover him and stepped forward, opening the door an inch. A woman stood outside, her parka dusted with snow, blonde hair escaping from her hood, blue eyes sharp and tired. She looked about 35, with a strength that came not from muscles, but endurance. Lieutenant Cole? She asked quietly. Ethan's hand hovered near his weapon. Who's asking? Agent Tessa Monroe, Department of Naval Intelligence. She slowly reached into her coat and produced a sealed envelope bearing the Navy crest. Your unit's last encrypted transmission was traced to me. I was told to find you before they did. Daniel eyed her suspiciously. That uniform patch looks brand new. Because it is, she said flatly. I burned the old one when they tried to kill me. They let her in cautiously. Monroe removed her gloves, revealing slender fingers and scars across her palms, old burns, likely from an explosion. Kane's operation is collapsing, she said. He's cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might expose him, including me. She laid the envelope on the table. Inside were satellite images of military convoys moving across frozen terrain, their routes forming a pattern. He's not just smuggling drugs anymore, she continued. He's moving something else, something worth killing half his command to protect. Ethan studied the images, his face hardening. Then we hit the next convoy, he said. Linda turned to him sharply. You're barely standing. I'll manage. Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered and died. Outside, the wind had stopped. Silence hung thick, broken only by the faint whine of an engine approaching in the distance. Monroe's eyes widened. That's not one of ours. Daniel moved to the window, peering through the darkness. Convoy? He whispered. No, Ethan said grimly, reaching for his rifle. It's Kane's men. Rex began to bark furiously, his voice echoing through the cabin. The headlights of armored vehicles pierced the tree line, cutting through the snow like knives. Ethan turned to his mother, his voice calm but urgent. "Get to the back. Take the locket. If they get me, don't let them get it." Linda's hand tightened around the steel locket, her mind racing with both terror and pride. Outside, the engines roared closer. The walls began to shake, and somewhere in that chaos, a voice called over a loudspeaker, chilling, commanding, unmistakable. "Lieutenant Cole, stand down. This is General Robert Kane. Let's finish what we started." The first bullet shattered the window, sending glass raining across the cabin floor. The roar of gunfire drowned out the wind, echoing through the frozen forest. Ethan Cole dove behind an overturned table, dragging Tessa Monroe with him. "They're flanking both sides," Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he fired toward the tree line. Outside, the headlights of armored vehicles swept across the snow, painting the cabin in waves of blinding white. Rex barked furiously, his body low and ready to spring. Linda crouched behind a crate, clutching the steel locket tight in her fist. Her face, pale but determined, glowed faintly in the firelight. The fear that once paralyzed her had turned into a sharp, focused resolve. "We can't hold them off forever," she called. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We don't need to, just long enough to move." He motioned to Rex. "Guard Mom." The dog obeyed instantly, positioning himself beside Linda, growling low as shadows flickered outside the shattered window. Tessa reloaded her sidearm, her movements quick and precise despite the chaos. The burned scars on her hands caught the light as she gripped her weapon. "There's a ridge behind the cabin," she shouted. "If we cut through it, there's an access tunnel. It leads to an old mine. Kane's men won't risk chasing us inside." Daniel gave a grim nod. "Then we move before they level this place?" A thunderous boom shook the ground as one of the armored trucks fired a round into the cabin wall. Wood splintered, snow poured in, and the air filled with dust and smoke. Ethan grabbed the small encrypted drive from the table. "Go!" he yelled. Linda hesitated for only a moment, then followed Daniel and Tessa out the back door into the blizzard. Rex ran beside them, his black and tan fur nearly invisible in the storm. Ethan stayed behind for cover, firing precise bursts toward the oncoming soldiers. The flash of muzzles lit up the snow like lightning. His body moved on instinct, years of combat training taking over, but his mind was on one thing: keeping them alive. When his magazine clicked empty, he grabbed a grenade from his belt, pulled the pin, and tossed it through the doorway. The explosion roared like thunder, sending heat and debris into the night. Then he ran. They reached the ridge, panting, the snow up to their knees. The old mine entrance was half buried under ice. Daniel, despite his age, moved with practiced speed, clearing the path with his shovel. "This thing's older than we are," he muttered. "Perfect hiding place," Tessa said. "No signal, no heat signatures." Inside the mine, the world turned to shadows and echoes. The walls glistened with frost, and their breaths came out in clouds. Ethan's flashlight beam swept across the darkness, revealing rusted mining equipment and collapsed beams. Rex sniffed the air, his ears twitching, tail low but alert. He stopped suddenly, whining softly. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" A faint sound came from deeper in the tunnel, a metallic click, followed by footsteps. Out of the dark emerged a tall man in a heavy parka, carrying a rifle with a flashlight strapped to its barrel. His beard was thick and streaked with gray, his blue eyes calm and sharp. "Put the gun down, Lieutenant," he said. His voice was steady, commanding, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to giving orders. Ethan froze, lowering his weapon slowly. "Captain Harlan Pierce," he said finally, recognition dawning. "I thought you were killed in Afghanistan." The man gave a faint, humorless smile. That's what Kane wanted everyone to think. Captain Harlan Pierce was once Ethan's commanding officer, a man in his late 40s with a reputation for impossible missions and unshakable loyalty. He had the solid build of a soldier and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "You're part of this?" Ethan demanded. "Part of it? No, son, I've been trying to stop it." Pierce slung his rifle over his shoulder and looked at Linda. "Mrs. Cole, I owe your husband my life. When I heard what happened to him, and to you, I started digging. Kane's been using Northfall as cover for years. You've barely scratched the surface." Linda stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then help us finish it." Pierce gestured for them to follow deeper into the mine. "We're not safe here. There's a sub-level bunker from the old Cold War days. That's where I've been keeping my files." As they walked, Tessa studied him warily. "You're alone out here?" "Not anymore," Pierce said simply. The bunker was a relic of another time. Steel doors, dust-covered consoles, maps of the Arctic pinned to the walls. Pierce's workspace was cluttered with old reports and photographs. He pointed to one, an aerial image of cargo planes landing at an ice runway. "That's Northfall's core," he said. "It's not just a drug route. Kane's moving biological samples, something they recovered from an old Russian site beneath the permafrost. He's selling it to the highest bidder." Ethan's stomach turned. "You're saying he's trafficking bioweapons?" "Something worse," Pierce replied. "A virus that can survive the cold, genetically modified decades ago. The kind of thing no one should ever wake up." Linda pressed a hand to her chest, the locket cool against her skin. "That's what your father was investigating," Pierce added quietly. "He found out about Northfall long before Kane rose in rank. He tried to warn the Pentagon. They silenced him." The revelation hung heavy in the frozen air. Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we end it." Pierce nodded. "We can, but not here. We need to reach the airfield and destroy the cargo before it leaves Alaska. I have a contact at Fort Greely, Colonel Sarah Whitmore. She's clean, one of the few left who hasn't sold out." "To Kane." Tessa crossed her arms. "You trust her?" "With my life," Pierce said, "and yours if you're smart enough to follow orders." A low rumble shook the ground, dust sifting from the ceiling. Daniel glanced upward. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "Thermal sensors. They found us." Ethan grabbed his rifle. "Then we move. Now." They sprinted toward the back exit, the tunnel echoing with the sound of approaching engines. Rex barked wildly, leading the way through the dark. As they emerged onto the ridge again, the sky erupted in orange light, a missile strike. The blast hurled them into the snow, ears ringing, vision blurred. Ethan rolled over, coughing, as flaming debris rained from the sky. "They bombed the entrance," Daniel gasped. Through the smoke, a shadow moved, tall, broad, wearing night vision goggles. The unmistakable silhouette of General Kane stepped into the light of the burning wreckage, flanked by soldiers. His gray hair gleamed under the fire's glow, his gloved hand gripping a radio. "Lieutenant Cole," he called out calmly, "you never learned when to stop." Pierce raised his weapon, but Kane's men surrounded them. There were too many. Kane's smirk was faint, confident. I should have finished this 20 years ago, when your father tried to play hero." He nodded once. A soldier stepped forward, pointing his rifle at Ethan's chest, and then, without warning, the ground beneath them groaned and split, a buried shaft collapsing from the blast. Snow and rock gave way. Ethan's last sight, before falling into darkness, was Rex leaping toward him, barking as the world disappeared beneath their feet. Darkness swallowed everything as Ethan Cole plunged through the collapsing tunnel. Snow and ice slammed into him like stone, tearing at his jacket. The world spun until his body hit something solid and cold. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but when he forced himself up, his hand brushed fur. Rex was there, alive, whining softly but unhurt. Ethan exhaled a shaky breath, pulling the dog close. "Good boy. You never leave me, do you?" His voice trembled, more from emotion than pain. The dim glow of his flashlight flickered to life, cutting through the shadows. He was in a cavern, a vast hollow beneath the glacier, walls shimmering like glass, frozen rivers of ice stretching into darkness. The collapse had sealed the shaft above them. No sound of gunfire reached this deep. Only the slow dripping of melting water echoed like a clock counting down. Ethan's shoulder throbbed and his fingers were stiff from cold, but he forced himself to move. He had been trained to survive the impossible. Far above, Linda screamed her son's name, snow spilling around the crater where the ground had given way. Daniel held her back as she tried to rush toward the edge. "You can't get down there," he shouted. Her tear-streaked face was pale under the stormlight. "He's still alive, Daniel, I know it." Captain Harlan Pierce stood nearby, one hand pressed against a bleeding wound on his arm. His expression was grim, but not hopeless. "He's a SEAL," he said. "If anyone can survive that fall, it's him." Tessa Monroe knelt beside Pierce, binding his arm with strips of fabric torn from her jacket. "We can't stay here," she said, voice tight with urgency. "Kane's men are regrouping." Pierce nodded toward the tree line where faint red lights flickered, drones scanning the snow for heat signatures. "They'll find us in minutes." He turned to Linda. "If we move now, we can reach my contact at Fort Greely by sunrise. She can get us transport and weapons." Linda hesitated, eyes flicking back to the pit. Pierce rested a steady hand on her shoulder. "Your son's alive, but we can't save him if we're all dead here." Ethan, deep below, had begun exploring the cavern, Rex following close. The dog's paws crunched on ice, nose twitching, ears perked. Ahead, faint blue light glowed from within the glacier wall, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Ethan approached cautiously and saw something embedded in the ice. A metal container, half exposed, its sides marked with faded Cyrillic letters. He wiped the frost with his glove. The label was barely legible, but clear enough. Biological Research, 1974. His breath caught. My God! A movement behind him made him spin, rifle raised. Out of the shadows stepped a man, his posture hunched, his clothes ragged and layered for survival. His beard was thick and gray, his eyes sunken but alive with wary intelligence. "Easy," the stranger said, raising his hands. His accent was faintly Russian. "I'm not your enemy." Ethan kept his gun trained on him. "Then start explaining." The man's name was Dr. Viktor Orlov, once a microbiologist from Novosibirsk. In his late 60s now, he looked like a man who'd been buried in the ice along with his sins. Deep lines creased his face, and his lips trembled when he spoke. "I worked on Project Northfall long before your general..." turned it into a weapon. They thought the cold could preserve everything, even death. He gestured toward the frozen container. Inside that box is a virus engineered to survive in extreme temperatures. They wanted to test it. I refused. I destroyed what I could and ran, but Kane found my research. Ethan lowered his weapon slightly. You've been hiding here all this time? Orlov nodded. This place was once a Russian research site, later abandoned when the glacier advanced. I stayed because it's the one place Kane's machines cannot see. But now you've brought attention. He looked at Rex and smiled faintly. Your friend is loyal. He smells the rot in the ice, doesn't he? The dog growled low, uneasy. Above ground, the survivors pushed through the storm toward Fort Greely. The snow turned to sleet, stinging their faces. Colonel Sarah Whitmore's base lay 15 miles east, hidden within the mountains. Pierce led the way despite his wound. He moved like a man fueled by purpose rather than strength. She was my second in command once, he said between breaths. She won't turn us away. Colonel Whitmore awaited them at the base entrance, a tall, commanding woman in her early 50s with sharp brown eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight braid. Her uniform was pristine, even in the cold. She looked like someone who had never accepted defeat. Pierce, she greeted curtly. You look like hell. He managed a weary smile. Good to see you too, Colonel. Her gaze shifted to Linda. Mrs. Cole, I presume. I was briefed about your husband's investigation years ago. I didn't believe it then. I should have. They moved inside the bunker, a dimly lit war room filled with radio consoles and maps of the Arctic. Whitmore poured coffee into metal mugs, the smell grounding them back in reality. You're saying Kane's reviving Northfall? She asked. It's not just revived, Pierce replied. It's airborne, and if Ethan's right, he's found the delivery system. Back beneath the glacier, Ethan and Orlov examined the container more closely. Its seal was cracked, leaking faint vapor that curled in the frigid air. Orlov's face went pale. It's active, he whispered. Even the cold cannot kill it now. He turned to Ethan. You must destroy it. Burn it. Ethan shook his head. Explosives will bring the whole glacier down on us. Then you seal it deeper, Orlov said urgently, before Kane arrives. Rex barked suddenly, staring up, toward the tunnel above. The dog's instincts were never wrong. Ethan grabbed his rifle. They're coming. The sound of distant engines echoed faintly through the cavern, growing louder. Orlov's expression turned grim. He found you. At Fort Greely, an alert blared across the monitors. Whitmore frowned. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the north. No transponder. Pierce's stomach dropped. It's him. Linda's eyes widened. Kane? Whitmore nodded slowly. And he's coming in fast. She turned to her officers. Scramble the defenses. Ethan activated his radio, static filling his ear. Mom, can you hear me? Linda gasped, fumbling with her comms. Ethan, thank God, where are you? His voice was broken by interference. Underground. Found something. Biological. Can't let it. The line cut to static, leaving only fragments. Linda clutched the radio to her chest. He's alive, she whispered, but Kane's heading for him. In the frozen cavern, Ethan and Orlov worked feverishly to reseal the leaking container using whatever tools they could find. Metal plates, welding torches, frost-bitten hands trembling. Rex stood guard, snarling as faint lights appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Kane's soldiers moving in formation, their rifles glowing in infrared. Ethan handed the torch to Orlov. Finish sealing it. I'll hold them off." Orlov hesitated, eyes full of fear and admiration. "You're like your father," he said softly. Ethan gave a grim smile. "Let's hope I'm faster." He took position behind an overturned crate, breath fogging the air, fingers steady on the trigger. The first enemy appeared in his sights. He fired. The shot echoed through the ice like thunder. Rex lunged forward, attacking the nearest soldier, his growls drowned by gunfire. The cavern erupted into chaos. Flashes of red light, smoke, and the sharp scent of gunpowder mixing with frost. Ethan reloaded, heart pounding. He could see Kane's silhouette at the tunnel's end, watching calmly through the haze. The general's voice, amplified by the radio, rolled through the chamber like a threat carved in stone. "You can't stop progress, Lieutenant. You can only delay it." Ethan fired again, hitting the light near Kane's shoulder. Sparks flew. "Then I'll make sure you never wake what's buried here," he growled. Kane smiled coldly and raised a detonator. "We'll see." A deafening explosion ripped through the glacier, blinding light swallowing everything. Silence followed the explosion, deep, oppressive, and absolute. When Ethan Cole opened his eyes, the world was reduced to shades of blue and white. Ice fragments floated in the air like glass dust, shimmering in the faint glow of his shattered flashlight. His ears rang, his breath came ragged, but he was alive. Rex was beside him, half buried in snow, one paw twisted awkwardly. Ethan pulled the dog free, brushing frost from its muzzle. "Stay with me, buddy," he whispered. Rex blinked, licked his hand, and pressed close, trembling, but alive. The cavern that once held the virus vault had collapsed into a fractured underworld, a frozen grave for soldiers and secrets alike. The air smelled of ozone and burning fuel. In the distance, flames flickered through the cracks in the ice, where Kane's detonation had triggered partial collapse. Ethan's rifle was gone, his shoulder bleeding again, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. Somewhere in the smoke, movement stirred, a shadow limping, deliberate, unhurried. "Lieutenant," came that voice, deep and cold. General Robert Kane stepped from behind a wall of broken ice, his uniform torn, his once impeccable coat smeared with blood and soot. The years of command had etched lines into his face, but his eyes, steel gray and relentless, still gleamed with pride and power. "You should have stayed dead," Kane said, voice calm despite the chaos. He held a pistol, his hand steady. Ethan rose to his feet slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. "And you should have stayed human," he replied. Kane's lips curved in something between a smirk and regret. "Humanity is weakness. I saw it in your father before he died. He wanted to destroy Northfall. I wanted to control it. That's the difference between heroes and men who change history." Ethan clenched his jaw. "My father died trying to stop you, and so will I, if I have to." Kane lifted the gun, but Rex barked sharply and lunged. The dog hit him full force, teeth sinking into his arm. Kane fired, a deafening crack, and Rex yelped, rolling across the ice. "No!" Ethan roared, charging forward. The two men collided, sliding across the slick surface, fists striking with the desperation of men who knew only one would walk away. Kane was strong despite his age, his blows precise, trained. Ethan fought with fury, pain, and years of buried rage. Their struggle carried them towards the shattered vault. A faint hissing came from within. The container cracked open once more, vapor spilling into the cold air. Kane noticed and laughed, breath fogging. "You've already lost. That virus will outlive both of us." Ethan slammed him against the ice. "Not if I bury it for good." Far above, at Fort Greely, alarms blared across the control room. Colonel Sarah Whitmore stood at the command console, her eyes sharp beneath the harsh fluorescent light. She wore her battle gear now, gray tactical armor, pistol holstered at her side. "We've lost contact with Cole," an officer reported. Whitmore's expression didn't waver. "Then we find him. Prep the drone strike. We can't let that virus reach the surface." Linda Cole, standing nearby with her face pale and lined with exhaustion, turned sharply. "You're going to bomb him?" "I'm going to save millions," Whitmore replied quietly. "Your son knows the stakes." Linda's fingers tightened around the steel locket at her neck. "He's not just a soldier. He's my boy. If there's a chance, any chance, he's alive, I'm not letting him die under friendly fire." Pierce, leaning heavily on a crutch, placed a hand on her shoulder. "He wouldn't want you to stop it, Linda. He'd want you to finish it." Her eyes glistened, torn between duty and love. "Then he'd better make it out," she whispered. Back in the ice cavern, Kane stumbled, his face bleeding from a cut above his brow. He reached for his fallen weapon, but Ethan kicked it away. The general smirked, even as he gasped for breath. "Do you think killing me will stop this? There's another facility, another shipment. You can't undo what's been started." Ethan shook his head. "Maybe not, but I can make sure you never start again." He drew a flare from his belt, one of the emergency igniters used for signaling air extraction. "You always said men like you change history," he said. "Let's see how history remembers you now." He threw the flare toward the leaking vault. It struck the fuel canister Kane's men had left behind, and in an instant, fire roared to life. Kane lunged at him, but Ethan tackled him backward, both of them crashing through a collapsing ridge of ice. The explosion consumed the chamber, flames racing through the cracks, the heat meeting the ancient cold in a violent storm of steam and light. Above, Whitmore's radar lit up. "Heat signature, massive detonation underground," a technician shouted. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "That's him." Linda's hand trembled. "Ethan." Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, from the smoldering fissure that marked the glacier's heart, a movement, a dark figure climbing from the haze, dragging another behind him. Ethan emerged, coughing, face streaked with soot. Kane lay unconscious in his grip, bloodied but alive. Behind them, Rex limped from the smoke, his fur singed, but his spirit unbroken. Linda fell to her knees in disbelief as her son stumbled toward the waiting soldiers. Ethan handed Kane over to Pierce and Whitmore. "You'll need him alive," he rasped. "He's the last proof you'll get." Whitmore saluted silently, signaling medics. "You did it, Lieutenant." "No," Ethan said, glancing at his mother and the wounded dog resting beside her. "We did." 2 days later, news rippled across the country. General Robert Kane arrested for high treason and bioterrorism. The North Fall Project was dismantled, and the EO surviving virus samples destroyed under UN supervision. Ethan refused a medal, choosing instead to remain at Fort Greely to help rebuild what was broken. In the quiet of dawn, snow fell over the base like ash. Linda stood outside the infirmary, watching the first rays of sunlight turn the horizon gold. Ethan approached, arm bandaged, limping slightly. "How's Rex?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Stubborn as you. The vet says he'll walk again." "Then he's earned his rest." They stood in silence for a while, the wind soft against their faces. "Dad would have been proud," Linda said. Ethan nodded, eyes distant. "He's the reason we made it this far." He pulled the steel locket from her neck and placed it in her hand. "Keep it. It belongs where it started." She looked at him, tears welling. "What will you do now?" Ethan smiled, weary but at peace. "I think it's time to stop running." He turned toward the horizon, where the sun broke through the clouds, warm light spilling over the frozen peaks of Denali. Rex barked once, tail wagging weakly as if echoing the sentiment. Somewhere within that golden light, beneath the snow and memory of fire, the last traces of Northfall melted away, buried forever beneath ice and silence. When the snow finally stopped falling over Denali, the world seemed reborn, quiet, clean, and full of fragile light. In that silence, Ethan realized something profound. Survival wasn't the miracle. Forgiveness was. The hand that saved him wasn't only his own, it was the unseen grace that had guided him through every shadow, every loss, every storm. Sometimes God doesn't calm the blizzard around us. He strengthens the heart within it. The miracle isn't that we escape the fire, but that we emerge from it still capable of love. Ethan's journey of loss, redemption, and faith reminds us that even in the darkest ice, there's a spark of warmth waiting to be found if we have the courage to look up and believe. So if you're watching this right now and life feels heavy or frozen around you, remember this: no storm lasts forever. The light always returns, and sometimes, just sometimes, that light comes from above. May God bless you and your family. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Comment below where you're watching from and leave a prayer for someone you love. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption, because somewhere, even now, another miracle is waiting to be found.